Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education. Featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
Welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. Be sure to join our community. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and YouTube. Just type Prepped and Polished. Also go to our site, preppedandpolished.com. While you're there, sign up for our free SAT ebook, 13 SAT Tips You Cannot Live Without. Have a question during or after the podcast? Submit your question to radio@preppedandpolished.com. Today's guest is Joan Casey, who's founder of Educational Advocates College Consulting. Joan has a master's degree from Harvard, is a CEP certified educational planner, and has visited and experienced more than 300 college campuses worldwide. On today's episode, Joan talks about the many kinds of opportunities available in college and what leads to positive outcomes by the end of college. Let's get to today's guest. Joan, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How you doing today?
I'm great, Alexis. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's start off, if you can share with us a bit about your background, focus on a few key life moments that brings you with us today as a really experienced college consultant.
So I started this business in college admissions consulting 10 years ago after having a career in public relations and writing, and which actually is pretty relevant to what I do here, since part of what I'm doing is helping students research college, but also figuring out how to present themselves. So even though it seems like two completely different fields, in many ways it isn't. But I think the real reason I started working with high school students is by working with my own children as they went through school and seeing. I have two very different kids, as most of us do, and they had very different needs as they went through their schooling, and it just made me a lot more interested in education. So I started to pivot and initially became a special ed advocate, and then I went back and got my master's degree in mind, brain, and education, which is the intersection of neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and education, and then built this business from there.
Nice. And tell us about Educational Advocates. What types of services do you provide? Do you work with both teens and parents? And do you work with students online?
Yeah, so we do. We work with the whole family because we feel like that's really important when you're thinking about college. But parents are paying for college, and cost and affordability is a big factor, and it's really confusing. So we want to make sure we hear from parents not only about their child, but about their values around higher education. We definitely do work with students both in person and online. So, for instance, I work with students in boarding school. So I might never even meet them. Occasionally with international students, and so everything is either on Skype or by phone. I've worked with students in Montana where there's no broadband, so we can't do Skype, but we managed to get the job done. And I think another thing that's important is we obviously are focused on helping students find colleges that are a good fit. But here at Educational Advocates, we also want students to be successful when they get to college. So it isn't, to tell you the truth, it's not really that hard to find a bunch of colleges and any given student can get into. But what is more challenging is to find a place where they're going to thrive. And that's what we're really geared toward helping the students achieve.
Nice. Love that. And you started Educational Advocates in 2004-ish, so that's quite a few years from today. Do you find that the need for college admissions guidance has increased over the years since you started your practice?
Well, it's interesting because I think, particularly if you think about Greater Boston, I think the average guidance counselors to student ratio is probably better here than it is in many other parts of the country. I think in California that it might be like over 500 students per guidance counselor, and in Greater Boston at at some of the high schools, it's probably, closer to 200, but still, like, that's a lot of students for a guidance counselor to handle. And the guidance counselors are amazing, and they do a lot more than just advising about college, but their jobs are very full. So I think that, those numbers have remained fairly constant in the past 10 years, but I think what's changed is I think families are more aware that there are independent educational consultants that are out there that can really add value and help students think about their future. College is a very expensive investment, so to get it right and to be thoughtful about it really makes a lot of sense. And as I mentioned earlier, for parents, like, many parents just apply and they don't think about what it's going to cost, and they wait till the admissions decisions come out, and then they choose, and sometimes the student can't go where they want because there's never been an earlier conversation about affordability and merit scholarships. So we try to build that conversation right up front so that everybody knows what's going on and there aren't any surprises at the end. And I think those are the kinds of things that families are realizing are really worth that investment in hiring an independent educational consultant.
I might be a partial observer here, but when I went to Needham High School, I think my guidance counselor had 200-300 kids, and I think I saw her like once.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, hiring a private coach if you can.
Yeah, and there are a lot of I think many independent consultants for families that can't afford. There are reduced rates and pro bono arrangements, and there's also a lot of college access organizations. So if people really look for it, there is a lot of help out there.
Nice. So this is our 82nd. So on podcast 66, I interviewed Frank Bruni, New York Times bestselling author of the new book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And Frank mentioned that people should spend more time thinking about what they will do once they're in the college instead of focusing so much on the getting in. So my question to you, Joan, is from your experiences, do you find that families think too much about that college label and less so on the environment that they're going to enter, the educational opportunities that can be found at a particular college?
I really, really do. And I think, we live in this culture, especially in Greater Boston, where there are a lot of myths about college. And, so people think things like, well, if you don't go to an Ivy League school or a top liberal arts college, your life is over. Your child will not be as successful in life. And, there have been so many studies that talk a lot more about who is this person, what kind of grit and determination do they have. And if you put a person that has the right ingredients of drive in pretty much any college, they will do well in life. And so we don't talk enough about, what does the college offer? And, are you even aware of the opportunities that are going to be available in a given college so that you know what to take advantage of right when you arrive? And we really do need to help students have those conversations a lot more, because I think that they're not always choosing schools for the right reasons. And some of them, they might be dying to go into that really highly selective school, but maybe when they get there, it's just not really the right fit, and it never brings out the best in them.
Wow. Now, what kinds of suggestions do you have for students who made it to college but now want to maximize their opportunities there and thrive?
So the number one thing, this is so simple, but many people don't realize, is that so those students who transition the most successfully to college are those students who get deeply involved in some kind of extracurricular activity from the day they walk on campus. So, maybe they go out, maybe they've always kind of loved to, music, and they like to get involved. Maybe they were the kid that produced music and DJ'd at parties. Well, maybe they ought to go over to the activities board, the students who organize the spring concert and all the activities on campus, and get involved there. not only will they have a great time and meet upper class students, but they're actually, without even really realizing it, building their resume for showing a business or a future employer that they can lead, that they can organize. So that's just one example. But, you know, getting involved is not only fun, but it will prove to help you find friends and help you feel comfortable at college a lot faster. So that would be one suggestion. Other things, you know, one of the most exciting developments in college since I went to college is that students can work hand in hand with a professor on some kind of undergraduate research. And so when we hear the word research, we tend to think of the sciences, but actually, you know, a student could work with an anthropology professor who's researching American youth culture, or they could, you know, work with a psychology professor on understanding the brain in students in children with ADHD. And they not only learn research methodology, but in many instances, they also are contributing to some kind of final paper that might get published. And so, you know, again, they're building on that experience. Maybe a student does that one summer, and then the following summer they build on it with some kind of an internship in a related field. So again, they're getting so much from their education, but also helping present themselves for future grad school or employment. So, I mean, there's so many examples, but those are just a couple.
That's incredible. I love that. Now, do you find with your students that when they maximize the opportunities found in college that this correlates with success after college?
Definitely. So I can think of one student with whom I worked. He went to Boston Latin, and he was on the basketball team. He didn't really play much, and which was a source of disappointment, but he told me that he was going to be a coach someday, and that either at a college or professional level, and he was very determined. And he went to, you know, a very large, like, basketball powerhouse in the Midwest for college. And didn't you know, it's kind of related to what I was just saying earlier about joining an activity, by the beginning of his sophomore year, he was the manager of this team, which, you know, for Division I Big Ten schools, that's a huge accomplishment to be. And so, you know, this drove his activities in college. He knew he wasn't going to be a player. And, you know, now he's working in basketball operations for a Division I university. So he,
nice.
He set a goal and he pursued it. And again, by really deeply getting involved in an activity in college. So that's kind of an interesting story. Other students that, you know, who did things like, you know, worked at a biotech company during the summer after college. So, you know, networking with your professors early on, getting leads from the Career Center, and where possible, trying to get funded internships. So that's another thing students might want to think about when they're looking at colleges is, how do they help them with that? And is there a chance to get funding? You know, it tends to be colleges that have more money and more alumni participation that fund internships for students, but those are important things to look for. So this one student, he worked at a biotech company one summer, and then the following summer he was in Bethesda, Maryland, working for the National Institutes for Health, doing research at a higher level, and he's in med school now. Now, obviously, it wasn't just the opportunities, but, you know, med school is so competitive. He needed to have the good grades and everything else, but those kinds of experiences helped propel him, you know, toward that goal. So I could tell you a lot more stories. I don't know if you want to hear them. We probably don't have time, but, you know, students do all kinds of amazing things on campus and take advantage of what their colleges offer, and it makes a huge difference.
That's amazing. Now, we're talking a lot about taking advantage of opportunities while in college. So let's flip the coin. Now, you don't always want to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. Are there any activities, opportunities that students should definitely pass up on? Maybe they're like time wasters, while they're in college?
I mean, this is going to sound crazy because we know college students love to party, but yeah. I do think think that there has been, you know, a pretty significant increase in you know, binge drinking, and it's become more and more of a problem. I mean, college kids have always, you know, drank, and there's always been, you know, issues related to that. But, it does seem to be a bigger problem. For instance, like 20 years ago, the demographic that drank the most was young men who didn't have a college degree, so like high school graduates. But now the fastest growth in the demographic is college age women, who now drink more than boys who have a high school degree. So there has been a change. So I think that students really need to look at that. I worry that there's so much pressure to get into a top college and there's so much focus on that students are learning to relax in really unhealthy ways, and then that's why we're seeing these issues in college. So, I think obviously kids should go to parties. Parties are fun, but just being aware of how this has really become an issue on college campuses and curbing that. Beyond that, I don't know that there are any other activities that I would say would be a waste of time, because I think if students have really good reasons for doing things, they can make the best of it. But that's the one thing. I think there are a lot of students that aren't, that regret later that they actually didn't work harder in college and maybe, did spend too much time being hungover on Sunday and not getting to the library fast enough.
Yeah,
and I don't know what we do about that, but that would be one thing.
Definitely. So what do you love most about your work?
Well, I really, it's really fun to get to know students and families. And, as I said earlier, we really are working with the whole student. So we're not, our primary goal is to help them get into college and be successful there. But what's fun and what I think is rewarding is, we meet students, for instance, we do live in a world where there's a lot of high anxiety and stress among students. So we pay attention to that. We don't consider that as a separate issue from helping them get into college. So if we notice that, we'll connect them with resources to try to help that. We make observations sometimes where we notice things about students and perhaps how they write, or we notice struggles they're having, and we're able to put them in touch with resources, because again, our whole goal is to help them be successful when they get there. It's not enough just to get in. I feel like we've really touched families, and families have really appreciated that we have looked out for the whole student, and we have thought about these other factors, during high school. And that's why we really like to meet families earlier in the process. Even though we start slow, we might not meet as frequently with a freshman or sophomore. If we can get to know them earlier and we notice things that might be getting in their way of success, then we can help them think about that. And that's really gratifying.
That's amazing. And I know we're talking a lot today about when students get into college and how to take advantage of opportunities there. Any advice to maybe some parents listening today on how they can kind of get involved, keep in touch with their kid, or help them steer their kid in the right direction when they're in college?
Yeah, I think that, in some ways it's almost the opposite of that, is that, you always obviously want to keep in touch and make sure that students like health and well-being, but it's also a time for students to figure things out for themselves, with that support. So, maybe, if you get a call from the student and they tell you they're excited about a women in gender studies class, not to say, well, what are you going to do with that? How is that going to get you a job? And learning how to have discussions about that in a productive way. I think that we live in Greater Boston. We have, a pretty highly educated community. I think that parents do value a liberal arts education. And of course, people want the kids to get a job when they graduate. That goes without saying. But helping students really get excited about, what it is they're studying, and realize that they can get a job or go to grad school from having studied any number of things. So being supportive of some of the things that students want to try and not discouraging them for the wrong reasons. I would say that's one thing. But it is, I think, it's really hard for parents to start to let go and allow the student to start to make their own decisions. developmentally, every student will be ready to make their own decisions at a slightly different time. But I think that is a sign of successful parenting if the student can go off to college and be independent and make reasonably good choices and know when to draw on help from parents or from other advisors on campus. That's the other thing. Advising on campus is so critically important. And when it comes to academics, the people there are often in the best position. So that's another thing we really encourage students to really ask about is what is the advising and the mentoring on campus, both from an academic standpoint, but also counseling services and things like that.
Wow. I would have never thought of that. That's great. How can we get in touch with you and your services, Joan?
So, the easiest thing for people to learn about what we do, we work with a wide range of types of students. We work with C students, we work with A students, and everything in between. We work with student athletes and musicians and performing artists. We have a specialty in working with students with learning differences. So our website is www.educationaladvocates.com. You can reach us via phone at 617-734-3700. And we have a newsletter that families can sign up for and right on our website. And we love to talk to people about and help them explore how we can be helpful to them.
Fantastic. And to the teens listening to us today, any pearls of wisdom before they go off to college?
Yeah, I would just say, try not to put too much pressure on yourself. You're entering a new environment. You have all these good buddies from high school that some of them you've known since you were in kindergarten, and you're going to go off and you're going to meet all these new people, and you're not going to have best friends instantly. Yet you're going to walk around campus and everyone else is going to look like they're really confident and comfortable, but know that it's a transition for them too. So join an activity, take advantage of things in your dormitory. If your college offers a pre-orientation program, go on that because you'll meet a lot of other students before classes start. And give yourself a break. Know that transitions aren't always easy and that you have a lot of support from your parents. You can reach your high school friends on Facebook and Twitter and other social media. And, just go and make the most of it.
Fantastic. Well, Joan Casey, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for having me. It was fun.
And this wraps up our show today with Joan Casey of Educational Advocates College Consulting. Go to educationaladvocates.com to learn about Joan's incredible work steering teens and young adults in the right direction. And for another amazing talk about how to pursue a quality college education, make sure to check out episode number 66, my podcast with New York Times bestselling author Frank Bruni. To access this podcast and all of my podcasts, go to preppedandpolished.com/podcast. And make sure you're on the lookout for our next podcast episode. It will be number 83, our next tutoring tips episode. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.